Welcome to this revision screencast for the SY2 A Sociology exam. Now the purpose of this video is to try to model the thought processes that should be taking place in your mind as you tackle the SY2 paper. And I'm going to do this by explaining what my brain would have been saying to itself, question by question, should I have attempted the exam paper that I'm going to use as an example in this screencast. And the annotations that you're going to see on this exam paper reflect what I would be thinking, what would be going through my mind as I tackle the paper. And we can see that from the moment I get the exam paper, I'm going to be thinking ahead. I'm going to be thinking initially about the time management, the fact that I've got an hour and a half to spend on this particular paper, and time management really is key to examination success. The rest of the front cover of the SY2 paper will look like this. So firstly, let's have a look at the section that gives instructions to the candidates taking the exam, and we can see that there's an instruction there that you've got to use black ink or a black ballpoint pen. So take a couple of black pens with you to the exam, because if your pen was to run out of ink and stop working, you don't want to waste time by having to put your hand up and ask for the assistance of an invigilator. We can see that you've got to answer question 1 and one other question. So question 1 is the question on research methods, and there are 2 parts to that question, and the other question is the media section of SY2, and again there are 2 parts to that question, a 20 marker and a 40 marker. The last instruction for candidates is another reminder about time management. So it says that you're advised to divide your time according to the mark allocation given, and that is really important advice. So there are 90 marks on this paper, you've got 90 minutes, so time management is a minute a mark. So try to keep to that as closely as you can. At the bottom of the exam paper, you'll see some additional information for candidates. So there's a reminder here that assessment of your paper will take into account the quality of your written communication. So what I would be thinking as I read through these instructions before I start the exam is the importance of writing answers that have a clear structure and make use of key terms. The final instruction is a reminder that credit will be given for references to recent public debate and also to research publications. So with recent public debate, one of the things that I would be thinking throughout the exam is whether or not I can use recent examples from the news, from current affairs, to inform my answers. And that might be particularly relevant to the media section of SY2. This reference to research publications is a reminder that throughout my answers I've got to use evidence, I've got to refer to key studies and name sociologists. So the first section of the exam is on research methods, and remember that there are 2 questions to this section. There's a 10 marker and there's a 20 marker. So what I would be thinking as I turn over to this section of the exam is that in terms of time management, I need to spend 10 minutes on the first question, the 10 marker, and then 20 minutes on the 20 marker. So it's 30 minutes of the hour and a half that I should be spending on this section of the SY2 exam. And the first instruction says that I've got to look at the item below, so the item below is this bit of text, and then answer the following questions, answer the 2 questions. But I wouldn't read the item first of all. I would read the questions first, and then I would scan the item for information that is going to help me with those questions. Now this first question, the 10 mark question, is going to ask me to explain the full meaning of a term from research methods, and in this case the key term is ethnographic study. Notice that there's an explicit instruction for me to use the item, so I need to use that in my answer, and the item describes an example of an ethnographic study, and we'll look at the item in a moment. These questions that ask you to explain the full meaning of a term, these 10 markers, what I would be thinking is that in order to get all of the marks, I need to make 4 relevant points. So I need to define the term ethnography, and then I need to describe 3 other characteristics of ethnographic research. And I need, wherever possible, to link that to the item and an example of an ethnographic study that I've learned prior to the exam. This 20-mark question asked me to identify and assess the strengths and the weaknesses of participant observation, which is one of the main methods used in an ethnographic research design. So in the exam I would be thinking about the quality of my written communication and thinking about the best way of structuring an answer to this mini essay question. So I would need an introduction, and the introduction would need to contain a clear definition of participant observation. And alongside that definition, I would mention the fact that this is a primary research method, it produces qualitative data, and it's associated with the interpretivist perspective. In the main body of my mini essay question, I'll try to make around about 4 evaluation points, and for this question, where I've got to look at the strengths and the weaknesses, I'd probably be thinking of identifying and describing 2 strengths and then 2 weaknesses of participant observation. And one of the things that I would always be thinking about with questions that ask me to evaluate sociological methods is I'd be thinking of linking evaluation points to practical factors such as time and money, ethical issues, representativeness, reliability and validity. So these are the criteria that I can use to help me identify and explain some evaluation points, some strengths and weaknesses of this particular method. And we can remember these key issues by writing down PERV. Okay, practical factors, ethical factors, representativeness, reliability and validity. So for example, in relation to participant observation, there can be big practical problems with this method. It takes a lot of time, it can be difficult to get into the group, it can be difficult leaving the group. Ethical issues are a particular problem if you're doing covert participant observation, because that obviously involves deception. Representativeness is again a big problem with participant observation, because you're only going to be looking at a small group. That smaller group may be atypical, they may not be representative. Reliability again is a problem with participant observation, because this is not a method that can easily be repeated. But validity is really the big strength of participant observation. The depth, the detail that we get from this particular method should help to produce a really valid insight into the group that's being studied. So I need to make some evaluation points. When I'm making those evaluation points, I need to use the item and also use some examples of studies that I've learned prior to getting into the exam. And then I'd end my answer with a brief conclusion. And my conclusion wouldn't just say something really bland, like participant observation has advantages and disadvantages, because that's obvious. I'd be talking about the types of research where I think this method is particularly useful, or the types of research where I think this method would be less useful. And that's what I mean by this phrase, horses for courses. Notice once again that I've got to make reference to the item because the question is asking me to do that. But also the question will always ask you to make reference to other sociological studies. So one of the things that you really need to do before you get into the exam is learn examples of studies for all of the main research methods, and you can do that by looking at the 2 screencasts that I've made on key studies that you can use in the exam for the method section. So this is the item that you'll see above the 2 questions, and I'd be scanning this item for information that will help me answer the 2 questions. So at the top we've got the name of the study that's briefly described in the item, and then we've also got reference to the name of the researcher. And remember not to call this person an experimenter. Okay, psychology students often refer to sociologists doing research as experimenters even when they're not doing an experiment. It's better to use the term the researcher, or in this case you could refer to the researcher as the ethnographer. This is the main description of the study. So this is an ethnographic piece of research. This involved the researcher beginning to hang out with a gang, and this identifies really a feature of ethnography. It's where you try to get involved in a group, so you try to immerse yourself in the group's activities. We can see the 2 main methods that made up this ethnographic study in the second sentence. So we can see that interviews were used, qualitative interviews, and also participant observation, which is the method most closely associated with ethnographic studies. It talks here about the researcher being allowed to act as gang leader for one day, which of course is the title of the book. And what I would be thinking about in relation to that is how that helps the researcher to achieve Verstehen, because the researcher is literally putting themselves in the shoes of the gang captain and seeing the world from their perspective. But I'd also be thinking about the problems that this might cause, and particularly the danger of becoming too involved and going native. And in the last sentence we can see that this ethnographic research involved the participants talking in detail to the researcher. So the kind of depth, detail and context that you get from ethnographic research could be linked to the concept of validity.